ladies and gentlemen, I'm approaching this issue from the experience, especially that I had for more than 3 years in Baghdad, when I was there as a head of the EU delegation from 2006-2009, and of course then followed the developments there very closely. And I have to say that when ISIS started its advance in Iraq, in a way I got this kind of a déjà vu feeling, because as has been already mentioned here by previous speakers, there was previously Al-Qaeda actively working in the very same areas which now are controlled largely by ISIS. Of course, Al-Qaeda, as also has been already mentioned by Iraqi ambassador, was then expelled from their positions there when the Sunni tribes turned against them through the so-called awakening councils, also supported by, at that time, by the US surge, 2007-2008. It's now almost exactly 5 years since I left Baghdad. When I was there and leaving from there, there was a certain optimism in the air, and the situation was relatively good. Violence was very clearly decreasing at that time from the peak levels it reached during 2007-2008. Even economy started improving and doing relatively well as oil production was growing. Oil and gas count more than 90% of the revenue of the state, so they are in a key situation. Even international oil companies at that time started to come back and signed their first contracts for oil exploration. Prime Minister Maliki, who came to power in 2006, had consolidated his position, because there were a lot of rumors earlier about his possible removal, some kind of a coup, and so on. But he consolidated his position, especially after 2008, when he confronted Muqtada al-Sadr and his militia in southern Iraq. At that time, the country was already preparing also for the departure of the US troops, and there was clearly confident feeling that the Iraqi security forces could assume full responsibilities of country's security after they have left. Now, of course, one has to then ask what went wrong, because all these optimistic feelings did not materialize in the end. How it is possible that ISIS could enter Iraq and take into control such a huge areas? I would say there are, of course, no one reason to this. There are many internal reasons, but also, which is important to remember, plenty of external factors and actors who influenced and contributed to this current situation. If you look at the internal factors first, since 2003, Iraq was in a new situation because Shias had gained control of the country through the removal of Saddam Hussein, and Shias needed to learn actually how to govern the country and how to be really in a majority. And at the same time, Sunnis had to get used to it, that they were a minority in the country and that they were not anymore dictating how the country was run. Of course, this created tensions within the country, and it is very well used these differences to have the success it had. Without the support of the local Sunni tribes, ISIS could not have achieved what it did. At that time, when ISIS started coming to and this campaign, one could say that ISIS and the Sunni tribes had like common interests and a common enemy, which personalized in Prime Minister Maliki. And that allowed them to work together. I frankly don't think that that interest, common interest, will prevail very long. Another reason, of course, in this situation was that Prime Minister Maliki was unable or unwilling to accommodate and integrate Sunnis to the new administration and political system. He also could not settle the differences with the Kurdish region, especially internally disputed boundaries and also the management of oil and gas resources. However, one should not put all the blame on Prime Minister Maliki. Many external actors worked to undermine his government during these years. In Iraq, historically, external actors have had a great influence in developments. That has unfortunately not changed very much. Saddam Hussein was removed by the US forces in 2003, and in the process they also totally destroyed Iraq's administration, security forces and economy. This meant that one had to restart building the state from zero, and this was not an easy task and would not have been an easy task for anyone, also taking into account the fragile security situation. One could say that from outside, one neighbor, Iran, I think was satisfied to see Saddam Hussein removed. They could not have done them themselves. Saudi Arabia has all along fueled dissent among the Sunni tribes. They never accepted Prime Minister Maliki, blaming him to be Iran's agent. Actually, at the time of this crisis, it was interesting to know that even the US Department at one point on their website defended Maliki and explained why he cannot be called Iran's agent. In the north, Turkey, in a way, encouraged Kurdistan region in its dispute on oil and gas management and in its stand with the central government or the government in Baghdad. But perhaps the most important external factor which gave ISIS its strength was actually the Syrian crisis. ISIS was relatively dormant in Iraq before the Syrian crisis started and gave totally new life and opportunities to an organization like ISIS. With the Syrian crisis, there were huge amounts of financial resources which flowed to various armed groups fighting President Assad from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries. There was also political acceptance. Anyone against President Assad seemed to be acceptable without questions at some point. Turkey allowed unhindered access for foreign fighters through Turkey to join ISIS in Syria. Of course, also Syrian President Assad contributed to the strengthening of ISIS. There was collaboration between Assad regime and ISIS. Regime was counting ISIS to fight other groups, and they also needed to prove their claim that they're fighting a terrorist group. But in the end, they were even buying oil from ISIS-controlled oil fields. As we can see from this, ISIS actually has had many godfathers. Only now these godfathers are slowly starting to realize that they may have created a monster which is uncontrollable, and they have got really worried. ISIS has managed to merge Syrian and Iraqi crises, so it is not just an Iraqi issue. It has become a truly regional problem, and that's why also solution cannot be found only inside Iraq. This question of creating monsters, unfortunately, also is an old story which has happened. Saddam Hussein at some point was supported by the West. Taliban was supported, and even, as I said, Bin Laden by CIA money to fight the Russians, and so on and so forth. We seem to be repeating this mistake and not learning from the history, but creating these situations ourselves. Of course, the question now is what should be done, what could be done. It seems from today's situation that the military advancement of ISIS has been at least contained or stopped. But of course, they have not been beaten, far from it. They have perhaps suffered some setbacks, but whether these prove to be permanent remains still to be seen. To my mind, and I think Iraqi ambassador was also referring to it, the key to defeating ISIS actually lies within the region, and in this case within Iraq, and how to the previous government. What kind of economic, political, social policies they will adopt to make a difference and better integrating the various components of the Iraqi society, especially the Sunnis, but also finding solutions to the disputes with the Kurds. This will be the key, as Ambassador was calling for all the parties to unite, to fight for this menace. And it depends on this, that there will be new kind of policies by this new government. I'm sure if there will be this kind of new, more integrating policies, the Sunni tribes would push back ISIS the same way as they did with Al-Qaeda a few years back. They will need, and there is, military support, but airstrikes alone, whether US or by others, they will not be sufficient. So the key will be really the policies which will be carried out by the government. However, as I already mentioned, the key issue here and made the difference between the situation with Al-Qaeda is that ISIS is not just in Iraq, but also very much in Syria, and cannot be sure whether they will turn out up also in some other country in the region if it's not very quickly contained. This means that there is a need to find also new policies in solving the Syrian crisis. I would argue that this means also more emphasis on diplomatic solution in Syria, not just regime change. The Syrian policies by the West, by many others, have been mainly concentrating on how to remove Assad from power, not really of looking for a diplomatic solution. And I think the emphasis has to change. And this also, in the end, may mean, despite all reluctance by those who have requested President Assad to go and refuse to discuss with his regime, that they may have to swallow their pride and at one time find a way to work somehow with the regime if they really want to be tackling also ISIS in Syria, and also to finding a more permanent solution of defeating and pushing them back. Thank you very much.
I'm very happy today to meet intellectual people in this university, and thank you for the organizer. Actually, I'm going to tackle this problem from different viewpoints which the gentleman talked about. And also, I want to ask you, ladies and gentlemen, why you are here? Why are you coming here? What do you want? You have to understand your role in this international problem, which I'm going to summarize my research, which is about 20 pages, and they want me to talk just 10 to 15 minutes. So I will rely to your intelligence to get all the parts of my research, and Mr. Elka explain the regional problem and how we solve it. But I'm going to tackle it from other point. Actually, my research is going to be 3 points. How did ISIS mean Islamic State in Iraq and Sham? Sham means Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. This is the first objectives they want to establish Islamic states. And Daesh, which they mentioned Daesh, this is an Arabic word for ISIS. So please understand these topics. So the first point, how did ISIS become a major problem, and how did they become a very strong organization? And who created ISIS? What's the history behind ISIS? Now, also I'm going to mention what's happening in the world. Why this trend of violence? And suddenly President Obama wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, ISIS, what's happening? And then President of France, then Germany, Britain, in 1 week, they make issues, seminars, conferences, trips all over the world. Oh my God, ISIS, what's happening? Why the world is so concerned about ISIS now? The second topic, it's how we're going to confront ISIS in the short term. And the third point, how we're going to defeat the vision of ISIS in the whole world. And this is, it means how we going to defeat this vision. Regarding the first point, I would like to go back to the Second World War. After the Second World War, America emerged as a superpower, and the economy of Europe was, I don't say completely, but I can say it's destroyed in some way or another, and America issued a martial law to build Europe economy to face the Soviet Union. So we had 2 superpowers facing the world, and they have a major conflict in the world. That's one issue. And we had the Cold War starting after the Second War, and it's really a major problem of the world. And in the other one, the parallel to this conflict, after the Second World War, there is a trend and vision of making the world as a peaceful, global, international community by creating the United Nations, Amnesty International, Human Rights, Court of Justice, International Court of Justice, even the Monetary Fund. Some trends wanted us to live in peaceful world rather in conflict. But unfortunately, this conflict which I am talking about between superpowers, they ignore, or they couldn't help the third world country economically, politically, and living in peace. By saying that, which this is a very summarized of a whole research by saying that the people of the third world, you have to understand, they feel desperate, disappointed. They become a people who have no vision, and they want revenge. I would like to say I am from Iraq, but I have studied in Leeds and Lancaster University, and I have done my thesis in the management studies comparing the third world and the Western world. So I would like you to know why I am speaking like that, because I live in Western for many, many years, but I also feel how the third world people feel about America and feel about the West. So now our world is moving into another direction. So that's why we need your attention. Now, in 1980s or 70s, Henry Kissinger made his dissertation. Henry Kissinger is one of the American politicians he was also a foreign minister at that time, who issued his dissertation to say the world must be led by one superpower, is the United States, and we have to destroy the Soviet economy, and they did. But the impact, what's the impact? The impact is of the whole world. They didn't care about the third world countries. Now, the other factors, I'm jumping. The other factor is the sectarian factor, which been emerged in the last 20 years or 30 years between Sunni and Shia. And now we are facing a conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. In this conflict, I don't mean who support who, I'm sure you know what's happening, but there are other factors, other people who use this sectarian conflict in order to destroy certain groups and certain regimes in the area. And also, the impact was very bad on our people. In these circumstances, the people want somebody to save them. They don't like even all those regimes. They don't want America. They don't want any saver. The Qaeda emerged in the beginning from CIA, America to face the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, and they make bin Laden one of the heroes against the communists. But unfortunately, the Qaeda become a danger to the world when they have done 11 September explosion to the WTC. The WTC destroyed the vision of the international community who wants to live in peaceful coexistence. They make a division between, oh God, Muslim terrorists and the West. And this is not true. And we need to understand how the Muslims feel. There are majority of Muslims, they want to live as you live, with you in a peaceful coexistence. Now, how are we going to defeat ISIS? Okay, we are going to help or support or defend Mr. Obama's policy by airstrike, by militarize Iraq and the Kurds in the north. And also there are so many points Mr. Ilka mentioned. But is that enough? He also talked about dry the resources. He also talked about we have to know how many fighters, their resources, you know, their strength, where it's come from. We have to cut these things. Is that enough? No, I'm not talking about the short term. Okay, this is good for the time being. But now I'm talking about a very, very important points which I would like you to listen to that. First of all, why ISIS become an international problem? You have to know there are so many sleeping cells in Finland, in Sweden, in America, in Germany, all over the world. They are waiting for the signal to make the world like a hell. So this is our role to become ready to face this danger. And we have to destroy this danger now, not in the future. How are we going to do it? First of all, we need to tell America to change their policy and to tell the third world country that, yes, America would like to help the other countries rather than just using them, rather than making conflict between other groups, as the people in the third world country understand that, or they have this vision. So this is one of the points. The other thing, that we have a problem between Iran and America about the nuclear weapon. We are hoping and we need to make a good dialogue between America and Iran to finish this problem in order to get this conflict going away from the region. We need to have a dialogue between Iran and Saudi Arabia to live in a harmony between Sunni and Shia. Must help the Muslim group who are moderate, who wants to live in peace with all over the world, in order those Muslim group can convince the ISIS or the youth that this is not a real Islam. This is not a right Islam which ISIS talk about. This is on people who are reaction from the policy of the West and who are telling the people wrong, who interpret the Quran wrongly. We have to give them the real Islamic vision, Islamic translation of Quran, because everybody translates Quran in different way. Also, we need to infiltrate those groups by cooperating with the Sunni and Shia group to infiltrate them, because they are living among us, in order to really understand or let them understand how we can live peacefully. You are in the West, you have to change, or you have to put a lobby to make the general international policy change, and we, with the help of you, can we change the vision of the youth. At the same time, the other point, that a new vision to the youth must be established by let them build the world rather than destroy the world, and also open opportunity for jobs and a new scheme to live in a very peaceful international community. This is briefly what I wanted to talk about, and there are so many points we need to discuss how we cooperate to create our world in a harmony and peaceful process. Thank you very much. Thank you to them.
As I mentioned, I'm Juha Saarinen. I work as an assistant researcher at the Finnish National Defense University, and I'm also a PhD student here at the university. And what I want to talk about is my understanding of what I see the Islamic State to be as a group, as an actor, and where they are currently. And maybe, if there's enough time, I see I have about 20 minutes, so I try to keep my comments short. But I want to finish with a kind of almost a prediction where we are going to be in, say, 6 months or 12 months' time. But if there are 4 things that you should remember about this presentation, I'd like to say that when we're talking about the Islamic State as an actor, first of all, it is a violent non-state actor, which means it is going to affect change through violent methods. It focuses on terrorism and guerrilla warfare currently, although it practices a wide scale of political violence from ethnic cleansing to using political violence as part of their organized crime activities. It's also a transnational actor. It emphasizes a pan-Islamist identity, meaning Muslims everywhere are same and they should practice Islam in a similar manner. Of course, their interpretation of what Islam is mainly ahistorical and decontextualized, and this is an identity or an interpretation of Islam that's not really found anywhere naturally occurring outside the jihadi circles. As was mentioned previously, the IS has fighters from over 80 countries, and currently you'd be hard-pressed to find a European country, especially a bigger European country that hasn't had its fighters join the IS. Thirdly, it's a global jihadist actor, which means it shares Al-Qaeda's ideology, even though it's not a part of their network anymore. It aims to achieve its goals mainly through violence, similarly as Al-Qaeda does. And lastly, it's a modern and political actor, meaning its aims are political rather than religious, and its methods are modern. One good example of this is how they utilize social media for their propaganda. One issue I take with some comments that have been mentioned earlier is that Islamic State is not Islamic, and that's something that Obama mentioned in his speech earlier this month or late last month. I think the Islamic State cannot be separated from Islam. It certainly sees itself as part of the Islamic tradition, but it represents a radical interpretation of traditional religious doctrines and Islamic history. It's a new form of interpreting very central doctrines, to say Salafism, and it's a very specific kind of political Islamic ideology. And these interpretations are decontextualized from what we can say is the Sunni orthodoxy, traditional presentations of or concepts of jihad or takfir, which they utilize, but they completely reinvent what their content is. And these reinterpretations are done to suit their own ideology, their own project, and their strategic context. So what is the driving factor here is using Islam and Islamic concepts to justify political violence done in the name of a thoroughly modern political ideology. Islamic State has been known with many names. I don't want to go too much into history. I'll try to keep it in post-2009, but it is contrary to what is often believed and written in Finnish media. It's a group that was first formed in Western Afghanistan in 1999 with the name of monotheism and jihad. Its goal was to overthrow the monarchical regime in Jordan. It was, of course, founded by a group of Jordanian jihadists. Mainly, the main leader of theirs was Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, which later on became a huge name among global jihadis during the most violent phase of the conflict in Iraq, post-2003. Of course, in 2004, it became formally a part of Al-Qaeda's network, and it changed its name to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or Al-Qaeda in the Land of Two Rivers, which is the more accurate translation. In 2006, shortly after losing Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in an attack, it rebranded itself as the Shura Council of the Mujahideen, which later on became the Islamic State of Iraq in 2006 as well. In 2013, it became involved in the Syrian conflict formally, and in 2014, when it established a caliphate, now it's known simply as the Islamic State. And what is the Islamic State? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's a part of, well, it believes similarly to Al-Qaeda in kind of the concept of global jihad. It sees itself as the vanguard, which is, for those who study political violence and history thereof, it's a concept that is taken from socialism, Marxism, Leninism. It sees itself as a group of actors that is supposed to polarize the wider population through very symbolic and important acts of violence. And it sees itself as the vanguard of the community of believers, and its idea of what the community of believers is very different from what I'd say moderate or mainstream Muslims believe. It aims to create a global political entity for this global religious community, as we've seen, especially after the 1970s. Islam is a religion that is found everywhere in the world, and it is especially troublesome for Islamists and jihadis to try to establish some kind of a political entity that is based on a territory. And Al-Qaeda is one of the first groups to kind of come up with a theory of how to go about to create a political entity for all Muslims. Their idea is to create a political entity or a caliphate that essentially consists of the globe. So it's a global caliphate. What is a bit different about the Islamic State is its idea of what this community of believers should consist of. It is rather purist. It aims to purge the community from apostates, meaning those within Islam who do not believe in Islam similarly as they do, and other religions as well. If you follow the news in Syria and to a larger extent in Iraq for the past 2 months, you can see that the Islamic State, despite its propaganda saying that the caliphate is for everyone, they have a very specific idea of who should be allowed to live in its caliphate. It are essentially those people who essentially practice Islam in a similar manner that they want Islam to be practiced, and no one else. It accepts no challenges to its authority, whether we talk about those individuals who are suffering under the Islamic State's rule, or those armed groups that it is currently cooperating with in Syria and Iraq. Now, my background is mainly in the use of political violence. That's a topic that I've researched for the past 5-6 years. And so I want to really focus on the Islamic State strategy, how they see their wider picture and what drives their use of political violence. Now we can see that Syria and Iraq are a clear strategic priority. They use political violence mainly in the context, geographical context of Syria and Iraq, and in the ideological context of their caliphate that was pronounced in I think late June. Their kind of strategic imperative at the moment is to hold and conquer more land for the caliphate, but also destabilize surrounding regions through terrorism and other forms of political violence. And again, use of sectarian violence and massacres has been particularly visible in their propaganda. But also, which is a little bit different from Islamic State's predecessors, is also that they try to govern the territory that they have governed. They are trying to provide essential services, subsidies for foodstuffs, etc., etc. But again, it kind of still remains to be seen in how effective they are in trying to govern their territory. And the ideological issue with this is that essentially they're supposed to govern their territory, but at the same time they want to purge the individuals who live under their rule. Of course, as we've seen in the Middle East for the past 3 or 4 years at least, they also try to create and exploit sectarian tensions. This is something that's been very visible in Syria, it's been very visible in Iraq, it's been visible in Lebanon. And this has some ideological and religious connotations, but we can go to those in the panel. And interestingly, we've at least all heard about the decapitation videos or the ritual executions of a couple of journalists from the US, British aid worker, Kurdish Peshmerga members, Lebanese members of armed forces. It seems that they may have a strategic imperative to provoke external interventions as to create more chaos in the environment that they operate in, particularly in the case of the US. Now, this is not necessarily sure. It's more speculation than anything else, and we're talking about a violent non-state actor, so we don't really have an insight to what they talk about behind closed doors. Another question or another interpretation is that these videos have more of a tactical purpose to energize, inspire, and excite their sympathizers and supporters through, especially through social media, but also through traditional media, which has been put a lot of effort into covering and analyzing these videos. And it seems the Islamic State, apart from most of other jihadi groups, it's been particularly successful or skillful rather in addressing Western audiences. And this is something that may be due to the fact that so many Western radicalized Sunni Muslims have joined them previously, and this they bring with them kind of know-how and the discourse of Western pop culture that they are using in their own propaganda. ISIS as an organization, it's largely self-funded these days. We don't have a lot of information, but there have been quite a few documents confiscated that show a light on where ISIS money comes from. Well, firstly, currently it's selling oil, getting taxes from various businesses and individuals under the territories they govern. Of course, organized crime has been something that they've been particularly good at for the past, I'd say at least 6 or 7 years, even before they became ISIS, let alone the Islamic State. There are parts of the Sunni areas in Iraq where Al-Qaeda, as it was still known, never really went away, and the regime in Baghdad never really took control. Mosul is one good example. They weren't really focused on terrorist activities, but they were a real source of income for them still. Of course, then there are kidnappings of Western hostages and then trading them for ransom. Unfortunately, there are quite a few countries that pay ransom and pay quite heavily to liberate their citizens, which goes to funding terrorism and funding the Islamic State. It is increasingly a hybrid organization, and what do I mean by this? It's part of a terrorist network, which means it has a cell structure, it has a lot of flexibility where it operates, where it doesn't have that much manpower in different parts of Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. You mentioned sleeper cells. I'm not entirely convinced it's a huge problem in countries where jihadi activity or the jihadi scene is quite as fresh as Finland. But it certainly does have its supporters, and it may have clandestine cells in various parts of the Middle East, especially those countries that have seen a lot of foreign fighters travel to Syria and Iraq. It's also a part guerrilla army. It currently uses most of its manpower in fighting irregular asymmetric warfare against various opposition groups in Syria and various militias and government forces in Iraq. And as I mentioned earlier, they're also they have parts of a proto-state. They try to govern the territory. This takes resources, this takes manpower, and it's something that they are at least dabbling with, although the effectiveness of this is, not clear to say the least. So where did we come from here? I'm not entirely sure if you remember, but Obama mentioned in a speech during the re-election campaign when somebody asked about the jihadis who are kind of organizing in Syria and Iraq under the black banner of the jihadi flag. Obama mentioned that, this is nothing to worry about. We have Al-Qaeda on the ropes, and this is the junior varsity team of terrorism, meaning it's the B team, whereas Al-Qaeda was the A team, and it was in the brink of a strategic defeat at the moment. Well, currently ISIS is the topic of many a seminar. It's something that weighs on the mind of Western and Middle Eastern policymakers, and it's something that is taken very seriously throughout the region and in the Western communities. ISI, or the Islamic State of Iraq, it was a fairly marginal group until 2011, and I say marginal in relation to what it is today. It never really went away. It just focused on the kind of activities that doesn't take that much manpower. Organized crime and terrorism are activities that you can relatively labor-free practice in areas where central government doesn't have that strong of a role. But it started to grow, I'd say, in Iraq after 2009. There were certain domestic developments that came into play. The then Prime Minister Maliki's increasing authoritarianism was an issue, corruption, unwillingness to integrate Sunni actors and Sunnis into the political system in any meaningful way, and in addition to that, integrate them in the armed and security forces, latter being particularly applicable to the awakening councils and the Salafat movement, which was supposed to be integrated into Iraqi armed forces and military so they could have a source of income. But Maliki later reneged on his promise, and they were left with very limited economic opportunities and a real sense of grievance that we can see playing out even today. Of course, in the context of Iraqi Sunni regions, there was also a lot of structural violence, a lot of instability and predatory behavior from the part of the Iraqi armed forces that really kind of added to the sense of grievance and sense of alienation from the political system, leading to widespread feelings of marginalization and victimhood among the Sunnis that was exploited by various parties. Jihadis was one of those parties, but there's also been ex-Baathists, those who belong to Saddam Hussein's regime and seek a return to the pre-2003 situation. Also various Sunni nationalists. Ideologically, they have this kind of idea of nationalism, but they may have different objectives. One from having an equal say in the political system to one saying that only Sunnis should be able to rule Iraq as it has been historically, in their view, being a Sunni state. But the most critical one, as Ilkka mentioned, was Syria's uprising turning into a civil war. Now, as I mentioned, ISIS became formally part of the conflict in April 2013, but it has had a role in the conflict since 2011. First, it helped Jabhat al-Nusra, or a group which was later named as Jabhat al-Nusra, to form in, I think it was from summer 2011 onwards. They provided the funds, provided the know-how, and they sent Jabhat al-Nusra to Syria in early 2012. Now, Jabhat al-Nusra, another name for it in the early days was the Islamic State of Iraq's Syria wing. And interestingly now, we see Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State fighting. They're very hostile towards one another, but that's a consequence of, I'd say, rather power politics within the jihadi group rather than any kind of ideological disagreement. ISIS first wanted to go to Syria, well, a couple of months before the formal announcement, and they saw that since they helped Jabhat al-Nusra financially and organizationally, Jabhat al-Nusra was part of their organization. And when they gave this formal announcement that we're going to Syria now, they also mentioned that Jabhat al-Nusra now is part of our organization. And Jabhat al-Nusra said, well, this isn't particularly the case, and pledged their allegiance to al-Qaeda central leadership, which prior to that had very little role in the conflict. Now, the entry of these jihadi actors were facilitated by a legacy of Syria's policy during the Iraq War, and we come time and time again to this kind of importance of the Iraq War 2003 to the jihadi movement, and we don't have that much time to go through it, but we can certainly return to it on the panel. But what is crucial is that during those early years of the conflict, the Syrian regime developed an infrastructure that was designed to smuggle fighters from Syria to Iraq, first from Syria alone and then from Syria and elsewhere in the region. And unfortunately, as often is the case, when you try to ride the jihadi tiger, as the saying goes, or when you try to sponsor the jihadis and get there to do your bidding, you fail, you lose control, and then you have to live with consequences. And in Syria's case, it was even prior to the conflict, it was an increase in jihadi and Islamist political violence in the country in, I think, 2007 through 2009. It's nothing compared to now, but there was a wave of political violence in the country then. And then we have Bashar al-Assad's strategy during the civil war.
Here's a basic thing to know about ISIS. That group that says large part of Iraq and Syria it has only a few thousands of fighters. That nearly is not enough to hold a series of large cities. Analyst David Kilcullen says that ISIS has done it because they are not alone. And David is a former advisor to the US military in Iraq. I will let you, gentlemen, think about this, what he means by they are not alone. And I would like to ask Abbas Bahmanpour, please, if you can come here, about the root and ideology of ISIS. Could you please tell us what me and you as a Muslim, we cannot do so brutality, killing people, where they get these thoughts from? Yes.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies.
Do you want to take the microphone?
Take the microphone. Yeah. Don't think it's working. Is it working? Okay. Yes, the ideology of ISIS. I'm Abbas Bahmanpour, by the way. I'm the Imam of the Shia mosque here in Helsinki, in Helsinki. Well, I'm not an expert, as we have here, on Middle Eastern studies or politics, so I'm not going to talk about the political ideologies of ISIS, etc. Rather, I'm a student of Islamic studies myself, and I'll be talking about the Islamic sort of perspective to ISIS. Before I start my discussion in that very briefly, I was told 5 minutes, so I just want to address an issue that was brought up by Saarinen in his speech that I have to say that I disagree with. So he said that we should emphatically agree with the usage of the moniker Islamic State for the group ISIS. However, I myself find that I agree more with the open letter written by the leading scholars, Muslim scholars in Britain and Muslim organizations in Britain a few days ago to Prime Minister David Cameron, where they asked him that in the future, whenever he refers to ISIS, he would not use the term Islamic State, rather he should use the term un-Islamic State, because they are far from being an Islamic State. Rather, they're not even a state really, as we already heard in the lecture. They are at best a proto-state, so neither Islamic nor a state. So I too find myself agreeing with this sentiment that we should not refer to ISIS as an Islamic State. We should not give them the legitimacy with this reference of giving the legitimacy of being an Islamic organization and being a state, because in reality they are neither. If tomorrow some crazy cult was established and the leader began to call himself Intergalactic Emperor, we shouldn't call him Intergalactic Emperor. We should call him whatever he is. So I think an Islamic State is a good secondary option. So I think that's what I'm going to be referring to them as, UIS or an Islamic State. As to the theological roots of ISIS, again I have to find myself, unfortunately, agreeing with Saarinen respectfully. Of course I agree with many of the things you said. That it is not ISIS, the ideology of ISIS or UIS is not something that is new. It is not something that is recent. In fact, there are many narrations that have been reported from the Holy Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whereby he warned the Muslims that there will come a group after me, and this group, they will be hudatha'ul asnan, sufaha'ul ahlam. They will be literally translated young of their teeth. They will newly have found their teeth, or as in English we would say, green behind the ears. So very young people, very sort of immature understanding of issues. But sufaha'ul ahlam, they have very grandiose, foolish dreams. And these people, they will claim to speak for very beautiful things. They will talk about very nice things, very appealing things. They will talk about bringing back real Islam, and or like that they are representing real Islam, and that how they are trying to abide by the Quran and they are trying to practice by the religion of God, etc. They will say very flowery, beautiful, appealing things. However, faith has not gone further than their throats, the Prophet says. That their faith has not gone further than their throats. What does he mean? He means that in reality, these are just words. True faith comes from the heart. These people, what they speak about Islam and what they claim to say for Islam is not true Islam. And true Islam has not entered into the hearts. They do not represent what Muslims represent, so to speak. In another hadith, he says that they are يُحْسِنُونَ الْقِيلُ وَيَسِعُونَ الْفِعْلِ, that they have beautiful words, but they have ugly actions. They recite the Quran, but the Quran, again he says, does not go further than their throats. Your prayers are nothing compared to their prayers. He's telling his followers. Your fasting is nothing compared to their fasting. Your recitation is nothing compared to their recitation. So when you look at it, on the apparent, on the outside, they're very practicing Muslims. They seem very appealing. Someone who wants to be a good Muslim, etc., they might find these people very appealing, in fact. But the Prophet says that Islam escapes them as the arrow penetrates the target. So a good arrow, what does it do when you shoot it at the target? It penetrates the target, it goes through it. So he says that Islam...
That they say they penetrate Islam as an arrow.
Yes, yes. Well, my translation is on the fly here, but so that they sort of, that Islam is not truly within them, rather that it has, it is something that is only passing by them. So they don't have the real faith. And then the Prophet ends the lecture and the sort of speech to his followers by saying that the most important sign of these people is that they will kill other Muslims. That this is their most important sign. That the way you can recognize. So it's this sort of radical ideology. It appeals to people who are naive, have a very low understanding of Islam, are not well grounded in the foundations of the religion, and therefore they are misled by this sort of flowery talk and by these sort of claims and wondrous, fascinating claims that, for example, UIS does, that we're going to establish a global Islamic caliphate from Spain to Indonesia, and these sort of completely wild-eyed fantasies that they tell to people. Then who believes in these? It's unfortunately, as we've seen, many of the young, naive people from all over the world who are sort of attracted to these ideologies. And of course, people who are ruthless or bloodthirsty who are also attracted to these sort of ideologies. However, the clear message that I wanted to portray today is that by no means, even though the claim is of an Islamic state and a caliphate, etc., by no means should we be mistaken to believe that these are in fact representing Islam. In no way do they represent Islam, and in fact it is the duty incumbent upon all Muslims to oppose such ideologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much.